You know that old saying, work smarter, not harder? Well, if there's a true champion of that motto, it's absolutely Mother Nature herself. Seriously, just take a look at how evolution plays out. Over time, creatures naturally adapt to become absolute masters of their environments. But hands down, one of the wildest, most mind-blowing phenomena out there is convergent evolution. Think of it as nature's ultimate rule of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Scientifically speaking, it's when completely, totally unrelated species independently develop the exact same superpowers. I mean, look at bats and whales, both randomly figured out echolocation. Or consider how entirely different branches of the animal kingdom, like insects and mammals, both evolved complex eyes. When you really stop and stare at the animal, you'll see a ton of shared traits. But it's only once in a blue moon that two totally disconnected species evolve down such a similar path that they end up looking like absolute carbon copies of each other. Take legless lizards and snakes, for instance. They could easily pass for identical twins, right? Yet they haven't shared a common ancestor in over 100 million years. That's a wider gap than the one between humans and cats. And obviously, we look nothing like the house cat. And here's the kicker. This evolutionary copycat game isn't just a modern thing. It stretches way, way back, creating these bizarre scenarios where animals alive today look eerily identical to prehistoric beasts. Honestly, it's basically the closest thing we'll ever get to actual time travel. One of the absolute craziest examples of this involves two heavyweight champions, one ancient and one modern, Ichthyosaurs and Dolphins. Sure, a bunch of ocean dwellers evolved sleek bodies to glide through the water, but Dolphins and Ichthyosaurs took this to a whole new level. It's so extreme that Ichthyosaurs are literally known as the dolphins of the Mesozoic era, even though they were straight-up reptiles. These guys shared over 20 distinct physical traits, beyond just their basic torpedo shape. We're talking identical finger bones, long snouts, stubby necks, live births, smooth skin, and probably even the exact same color patterns, with dark backs and light bellies for camouflage. But wait, it gets crazier. Recent fossil digs suggest that Ichthyosaurs rock a feature practically unheard of in reptiles and rare even in fish, yet incredibly standard for modern marine mammals like dolphins. I'm talking about blubber, a thick layer of fat meant to keep them warm and insulated in freezing prehistoric oceans. On top of that, their senses were shockingly matched. Both boasted incredibly powerful vision perfectly tuned for the dark, high-pressure deep sea, alongside incredibly massive, dense ear structures that gave them razor-sharp hearing. This uncanny resemblance spilled right over into their daily lives, too. Even though Ichthyosaurs had varied diets based on how big they were, the vast majority munched on fish, squid, and crustaceans. So yeah, essentially a carbon copy of a dolphin's dinner plate. Living that exact same hunter lifestyle is probably what forced both animals into the exact same evolutionary mold, separated by millions upon millions of years. The ichthyosaur first hit the scene in the early Triassic period and vanished about 90 million years ago. Now, obviously, because there were countless species of these guys over their 150 million year reign, not every single one was a dead ringer for Flipper.
Unlike the earlier
but there was
Phytosaur,
one specific family
the
that
true
really stole
modern
the
crocodiles
show,
emerged much
the
later,
Ophthalmosaurids.
firmly
These
within
guys
the
mirrored
Cretaceous
dolphins
period.
so flawlessly in size and shape. If you saw one underwater today, you probably wouldn't even realize you were staring at a prehistoric reptile. And yet, somehow, this mind-bending twin act pales in comparison to a much, much older matchup. Just picture this beast. To the untrained eye, what you're looking at is, without a doubt, a big, scary crocodile. Or some kind of ancient crocodilian, right? Nope, you'd be dead wrong. It's actually a Phytosaur, an absolute master of disguise that walked the earth roughly 196 million years before true crocodiles even existed. It belonged to the Archosauromorpha family tree, a massive group of reptiles that are much closer cousins to legendary archosaurs like dinosaurs and modern crocs, than to slithering creatures like lizards, snakes, and tuataras. And yeah, I did mention crocodiles in that lineage, but here's the twist. These two are barely even related. It's kind of like how we humans are mammals, but our connection to a kangaroo is incredibly distant. In fact, weirdly enough, plant-chewing Ichthyosaurs or the two-legged Pachyrukhos are much tighter cousins of crocodiles than the Phytosaur ever was. Which honestly makes it infinitely weirder that Phytosaurs are pretty much a Xerox copy of a crocodile. I'm talking thick, armored scales, elongated snouts, lined with gnarly cone-shaped teeth, stubby legs, and heavy, powerful tails. Scientists are convinced they also rocked a semi-aquatic river monster lifestyle, proving once and for all that the classic crocodile blueprint is just an unbeatable, timeless design. Their striking similarity is actually a huge talking point for why alien life out in space might look surprisingly like us, assuming they evolve in comparable habitats, of course. The logic is simple. If a biological hack works flawlessly on Earth, it'll probably dominate anywhere. Experts point out that the differences between Phytosaurs and true crocs were ridiculously minor, with the biggest physical quirks not even being visible from the outside. The Phytosaur just had clunkier, primitive ankle bones, way thicker armor plating, and crucially, lacked a secondary palate, which is the magic evolutionary trick that lets modern crocs breathe with a mouthful of water. But hey, who knows? Maybe they probably rocked these fleshy palates that completely rotted away before they could turn to stone. So visually speaking, the only real giveaway was the fact that those ancient Phytosaurs had their breathing holes pushed way up near their eyes. So yeah, basically a complete copy-paste job. This wild look-alike situation is probably the craziest example of evolution ripping off the crocodile design. But get this, it is totally not the only time it happened. There is an even more mind-boggling copycat out there, and spoiler alert, it was an early whale. Meet the Ambulocetus. I know it sounds absolutely nuts, but this weirdo is officially classified as a cetacean. It was stomping around roughly 47 million years ago, living a double life on land and in the water. It was this perfect halfway point in the whale family tree, but honestly, it acted way more like a swamp monster than a modern dolphin. Scientists are pretty convinced. It played the exact same game as today's gators, lurking just below the murky surface to totally blindside thirsty animals, grabbing them with insanely powerful jaws to drag them under and rip them apart. And to make it even creepier, its eyes were perched way up on top of its skull so it could spy on the shoreline without being seen. It even rocked this reinforced, bony breathing tube that kept its windpipe from collapsing while it wrestled dinner to the bottom. I mean, seriously, if you shave off the fur, this beast was 100% the mammalian knockoff of a crocodile. But hey, nature loves a plot twist. In a hilarious role reversal, crocs eventually evolved their very own whale equivalent. Enter the Stomatosuchus, a totally bizarre ancient reptile from the late Cretaceous period that was out there swimming, right next to the Spinosaurus. But as you'd guess, it lived a completely different lifestyle, and it definitely didn't hunt like your typical swamp crawler. Instead, it was rocking this ridiculously oversized, super stretchy throat pouch to just gulp down huge schools of fish and even small sharks in a single, massive bite, totally mirroring how pelicans or giant baleen whales grab their grub today. The crazy catch? Rather than having those hair-like baleen plates or a smooth bird beak, this weird croc was armed with tons of tiny, needle-like teeth that perfectly meshed together when it snapped its jaws shut. It basically acted like a deadly biological zipper, trapping everything, inside for good. And it totally stole the whale playbook when it came to size, too, easily stretching out to 10 meters, or 33 feet, which made it absolutely one of the most gigantic aquatic predators roaming the ancient rivers. Sadly, though, this incredible freak of nature design didn't survive the test of time, meaning we don't have any giant pelican crocs swimming around today. Now, you might think the oceans and swamps were the only places where animals were stealing each other's blueprints, but land dwellers were totally doing it too. The wildest part is seeing it happen between ancient dinosaurs and modern mammals. The absolute best proof of this is looking at ankylosaurs and armadillos. I know, at first glance, they seem totally unrelated, but put them side by side, and it is honestly spooky how much they look alike, especially when you think about the millions of years separating them. Both of these completely unrelated groups evolved heavy, head-to-toe body armor just to tank hits from massive predators. And if we look back at the extinct giant armadillos, the family resemblance is so crazy you can't ignore it. I mean, the ancient Glyptodon could practically be an ankylosaur in a Halloween costume. Some of these guys bulked up to absolutely ridiculous sizes, literally dwarfing modern compact cars. And they even swung these brutal tail clubs, exactly like certain armored dinos, especially the Anodontosaurus. But the absolute king of this prehistoric cosplay was a South American beast called the Doedicurus, cruising around during the Pleistocene. This thing lugged around a massive, heavily spiked tail that it swung like a literal wrecking ball to. Just absolutely shatter the bones of anything dumb enough to attack. And you know what? This tank build worked flawlessly for ages, letting them thrive right up until the first humans showed up in South America, which unfortunately signaled game over for them. But get this, at the exact same time, totally different mammals were also independently speedrunning the ankylosaur build. Take the totally wild pangolin, an incredibly unique mammal that threw away fur and grew these tough, overlapping keratin plates covering practically its entire body. It makes them look exactly like those old-school, heavily armored dinosaurs that never developed the heavy tail club. All of this just proves that when the wild is out to get you, the ultimate survival hack is to just armor up, hunker down, and let the predators break their teeth on you. But hey, the same exact copycat rules apply to attacking too. When it comes to plant eaters, evolution loves to prove that. A brute force, charge first, and never ask questions strategy is honestly the ultimate winning move. You can totally see this with modern elephants, and a creature so incredibly ancient that warm-blooded mammals weren't even a concept yet. I'm talking about the Placerias. This chunky, extinct dicynodont stomped around North America roughly 230 million years ago and sported two massive face tusks, just like an elephant. Now, plenty of its cousins grew tusks too. But what made the Placerias such a game-changer was the fact that its teeth grew super long, aimed straight at the dirt, and were utilized the exact same way a modern bull elephant uses its ivory, tearing up the ground, showing off for the ladies, and absolutely wrecking rivals in a fight. And just like those giants of the savannah, the Placerias showed off. Totally different looks based on gender, with the guys rocking massive, show-stopping tusks to flex their dominance, while the females kept theirs pretty subtle. So honestly, it was elephants that ended up copying this ancient reptile's homework, proving that when nature finds a winning formula, it keeps using it. Imagine a beast as massive as an elephant. Sure, fully grown ones only tip the scales at roughly 1.1 tons, but that still crowned them the absolute biggest plant eaters of their era, just like our modern proboscideans today. But here's the wild part. Their weight actually lines up way better with a hippopotamus. Scientists are convinced they share convergent traits, making this creature feel like some crazy, mashed-up elephant-hippo hybrid. Picture this thing just chilling out, wading through shallow waters and lounging on riverbanks for most of its life, munching on greens. It rocks some seriously hippo-esque upgrades too. We're talking a thick powerhouse of a neck, stout legs, and a totally barrel-shaped torso. And honestly, that just makes it even crazier that a handful of ancient, prehistoric elephants ended up looking super similar to hippos as well. Just look at the Platybelodon. It's mind-blowing when you remember that hippos are actually closer cousins to whales than to those trunk-swinging giants they lived alongside. Now, if you want proof that the whole head-down, full-charge strategy is a totally winning move, just look at a neighbor of both, hippos and elephants, the mighty rhinoceros. These absolute tanks first hit the scene in Asia before stomping their way across the globe. And a huge part of their success? Those deadly front and center horns sticking straight up. That hardware let them unleash some serious, jaw-dropping damage, especially when backed by their massive bulk. So, it's really no shocker that, throughout the history of our planet, a whole bunch of other animals totally ripped off this design. Being huge with an upward-facing spike was a massive trend. Take the ceratopsid dinosaurs, who rocked those exact same centered horns to intimidate rivals, defend themselves, and just show off. But hold on, the absolute wildest rhino lookalike didn't even come from the dinosaur family tree. It was another mammal altogether, called the trigodon. The most unbelievable thing about this bizarre beast, it didn't just sport a stubby little horn right on its forehead. Its entire body practically screamed rhino. The two animals shared such a crazy doll, match in body structure and proportions that, way before scientists even found its horn, they took one look at its bones and swore up and down that the Trigodon was literally just a newly discovered species of rhinoceros. But here's the plot twist. Not only was it completely unrelated to rhinos, but it also called a place home where real rhinos never even set foot. South America! Think about that. In a land utterly devoid of rhinos, this animal basically shapeshifted to look exactly like one. And get this, it happened at the exact same time that actual rhinos were roaming the earth. It popped up roughly 11 million years ago and stuck around until maybe 4 million years back. Experts bet it used its horn the exact same way a rhino would.
The 2D painting actually depicts a tiny prehistoric creature with shrew-like wings clinging to a stone stick.
It basically ruled over a massive, prehistoric, mega wetland that's completely gone today. The craziest part? While its closest surviving relatives actually happen to belong to a group that includes rhinos, the two are barely even distant cousins. The family tree it officially belongs to, the Notungulata, is entirely extinct today. So yeah, scientifically speaking, it's way out there. But hey, those Notungulates actually managed to thrive for more than 60 million years. With over 150 different genera in their ranks, I guess it isn't really that shocking that rhinos weren't the only creatures they accidentally copycatted. Want a truly mind-bending example? How about rabbits? Just look at the Pachyrukhos. It's honestly hard to wrap your head around the fact that this Eocene-era critter wasn't a bunny. But nope, it was 100% a notungulate, just like our fake rhino from earlier. That means this little guy was closer to a zebra than Bugs Bunny. Still, a peek at its skeleton totally proves it could bounce around if it felt like it. And the mimicry doesn't stop there. It basically mirrored a modern rabbit in almost every single conceivable way. We're talking a stubby little tail, super long back feet, rabbit-style teeth, and, yep, those legendary long ears. The only real deal breaker? Scientists think the Pachyrukhos was probably a creature of the night, mostly because it had these massive, oversized eyes. The reason they're virtually a one-for-one knockoff boils down to their daily grind, and the fact that they occupied habitats practically identical to what rabbits love today. It's just another epic reminder. If a survival trick works, Mother Nature is going to be dense. Spam it over and over again. I mean, just look at marsupials. They're practically famous for ripping off the designs of placental mammals, even though their last shared ancestor lived over 140 million years ago. Even the most legendary lost marsupial of all, the thylacine, was totally guilty of this. It looked incredibly like a canine, especially a wolf or a dingo. The resemblance in their skulls was so ridiculously spot on that the average person couldn't even tell them apart. Their teeth and overall body plans were almost exactly the same, too. And if you look at the raw anatomy, the thylacine feels way closer to a dog than to any other Australian marsupial. But here's the kicker. Internally, its DNA is far closer to a wombat or a kangaroo. It unlocked this wolf-like skin completely on its own, since the last granddaddy it shared with real dogs dates all the way back to the Jurassic period. The sheer, staggering coincidence of this evolutionary magic trick hits even harder when you realize that you and I are technically more closely related to a dingo than a dingo is to a thylacine. Crazy, right? Experts figure that, like always, this wild outcome just boils down to similar bay. Survival pressures making that classic, dog-like body the absolute best tool for the job. Want another total mind-bender? Let's talk about one of the most iconic creatures on Earth, the turtle. Their bizarre shape and tough shells make them seem completely one of a kind, but believe it or not, even in trawls. Yet, even with all their unique quirks, nature somehow whipped up complete copycats creatures that looked exactly like turtles but were totally unrelated. Take the Placodonts, for example. These guys were an ancient order of marine reptiles cruising the oceans back in the Middle to Late Triassic period, and they belonged to the massive Sauropterygia family tree,
bizarre
which,
shapes unlike
fun fact,
any modern
also
animal,
included heavy
as seen
hitters
in the
like the
orders
Plesiosaurs and Nothosaurus. Now, while a few of those Placodonts looked nothing like turtles, others absolutely nailed the look. Just check out Henodus, this wild creature really did. It seemed exactly like a prototype turtle. It rocked an incredibly similar shell, fully equipped with a flat plastron underneath and a curved carapace right on top. That heavy armor wrapped entirely around its middle, leaving only its head and its tail exposed to the open water, with the one massive difference being that its shell was built out of far more solid bone than any modern turtles. But just like our shelled friends today, that thick armor gave the Placodonts some serious, heavy-duty protection. And trust me, they needed every ounce of it, because the ancient oceans of Earth were swarming with some downright terrifying and lethal sea monsters. What is totally mind-blowing is that Placodonts weren't even the only guys in the Sauropterygian family to independently pull off this incredible turtle look. The exact same crazy phenomenon happened with the Saurosphargidae, an entirely different reptilian family that mysteriously developed ultra-realistic turtle shells and matching body shapes, even though they definitely weren't the bad actual evolutionary branch that created modern turtles. Honestly, if these guys or the Placodonts had somehow dodged extinction, we would probably have tons of completely different turtle-like beasts roaming the globe today, something I am sure Finding Nemo fans would absolutely love.
Activation sequence
another
initiated.
incredibly weird
Bioweapon
animal that got totally
stabilization
caught up in
complete.
the wild game of convergent evolution is the stingray. They actually had a dead ringer double that dominated the seas hundreds of millions of years before true rays even existed. Enter the Rhininids, a totally bizarre group of armored-jawed fishes that had zero genetic connection to the animals that would eventually become modern stingrays. In fact, since these guys ruled the waters roughly 400 million years ago and completely vanished shortly afterward, they never got the chance to meet their biological doppelgangers, which only showed up during the Cretaceous period hundreds of millions of years down the line. Yet, exactly like the stingrays we recognize today, Rhininids were completely flat, pancake-shaped bottom feeders. They even positioned their eyes right on top of their heads, giving them the perfect vantage point to scan the waters above while just chilling out in the ocean mud. And get this, their diets were practically identical, too. On top of all that, they rocked wide, fleshy wings, just like modern rays do. Honestly, the absolute only way you would know you weren't messing with a real stingray was by petting one. These ancient twins were covered in tough scales and light armor plating, while modern rays are, obviously, totally smooth, with that weird, rough, sandpaper kind of vibe. You also could have totally relaxed around these ancient swimmers, because they never managed to reach the massive sizes that true rays hit
deep on
today.
the ocean floor.
Plus,
these creatures
they were
lie in
completely
wait.
missing that
Though
venomous tail
seemingly
sting,
passive,
making them
their
basically
gaping
harmless
mouths
to
are a
any
trap.
medium to large predators. But being small didn't hold them back at all. They multiplied like crazy, and for a brief, glorious window in time, they completely took over waters. All over the entire planet. Now, while they might not have been as flawless of a ray copy as the Rhininids, there were also other early, super bizarre species floating around that happened to share the ancient seas with them. Even though they weren't even in the same evolutionary family, these oddballs basically adopted that flat, sprawling body layout resembling our modern rays. But to be totally transparent here, I really only brought them up because of their massive, ridiculous googly eyes and faces that looked permanently and absolutely shocked. If you ask me, that makes them a prime example of convergent evolution with the surprised Pikachu meme, if you really think about it. But hey, do not let those silly faces fool you. This wasn't some clever trick to look cute and cuddly. Actually, some also of these guys featured this massive, gaping trapdoor mouth that let them instantaneously inhale any unsuspecting prey
The
swimming
manta ray
directly
increases
overhead,
compression
while
to
those
gradually
hilarious,
advance,
oversized
gently
cartoon
increasing
eyes
the
were
base
highly
mass
specialized
thrust.
tools, perfectly evolved to scan the perimeter for deadly danger or to easily lock onto an easy snack. And hey, if stingrays had their own ancient carbon copies, you better believe the majestic manta ray didn't dodge this weird evolutionary loop either. Seriously, if you hopped in a time machine back to the Cretaceous, you would run straight into Aquilolamna, a spectacularly weird beast, rocking huge, sweeping wings, or rather, massively elongated flippers. From what paleontologists can tell, these dudes exclusively cruised the ancient waters right around modern-day Mexico. There, they evolved incredibly long, slender wingspans, literally tens of millions of years before manta rays ever hit the scene. They even independently evolved a filter-feeding lifestyle, making their connection to modern mantas that much more unbelievably uncanny.
The
But here
Aquilolamna
is the
glides
massive plot
effortlessly
twist.
above the seabed,
Aquilolamna
its
wasn't
tail
even a member
whipping
of
in a constant
Myliobatiformes,
S-shape,
the
the
specific
long
order
arm
that
used
encompasses
tail
all true
propulsion,
rays.
completely
No,
reinforcing the long
scientists
purification
have actually
despite the
tentatively
water
classified this
cross-section.
weirdo as a mackerel shark. To put that in perspective, this winged filter feeder is biologically closer to a great white or the legendary megalodon than it ever was to an actual ray. The one dead giveaway? If you look past those giant wings, you would notice its core body was totally streamlined and torpedo-shaped, exactly like what you see on today's predatory mackerel sharks. On top of that, another massive difference is that it most likely did not actually fly underwater by gracefully flapping its wings. Instead, it powered itself entirely by whipping its shark-like tail back and forth to surge forward. Its wings were basically just built-in hang gliders, allowing it to coast effortlessly through the ocean currents and save a ton of energy. And man, this strategy worked absolutely flawlessly for them. In fact, experts believe they only died out because of the catastrophic asteroid that caused the KT extinction. It is also exactly why this genius aerodynamic blueprint randomly popped up again, completely on its own, millions of years later. Now, I know millions of years sounds like a massive gap in history, but it is absolutely nothing compared to the wild timeline gap we see with another copycat, one that eerily perfectly mimics an animal we all know and hold dear, the monkey. Seriously, what you know are looking at right now is definitely not some early proto-monkey, or even a forgotten branch of the primate family tree. Nope. Prepare to have your mind blown. This was entirely a reptilian. Picture an ancient, monkey-like beast roaming the Earth 268 million years ago during the Permian period. This wild little guy, called Suminia, was about the same size as your average modern tree monkey. But here is the absolute craziest part about its biology. It independently developed two incredibly rare traits, completely on its own. First up, it rocked a fully prehensile tail built specifically grip and wrap around branches tightly. Second, we begin to see and way more mind-blowing, it had fully opposable thumbs, just like you and me. Sure, you can find a handful of critters out there with gripping tails or flexible digits, but hitting the evolutionary jackpot with both? Super rare. Add in the fact that Suminia pulled off this biological magic trick over 200 million years before actual monkeys even existed, and it is just staggering. To make things even wilder, brand new scientific discoveries hint that this creature also possessed opposable toes, basically turning it into the ultimate ancient reptilian monkey. Naturally, it lived exactly like a modern primate too, utilizing its awesome toolkit of grasping limbs to totally dominate the high canopies. Surprisingly, this little acrobat was not hunting for meat up there. It was completely vegetarian. Lacking any sharp fangs, its mouth was packed with specialized teeth designed perfectly for shredding tough foliage, all while its hands, feet, and tail kept it securely anchored to the branches. So, what is the big takeaway? Convergent evolution is just straight up spectacular. Now, before we get too carried away, I should point out that these jaw-dropping duplicates are definitely rare exceptions rather than the everyday rule. Still, it completely proves how a creature's specific habitat and survival niche dictate its entire body plan. Just look at the subtle, everyday examples all around us. Consider the beloved giant panda, a massive plant eater that loves chilling on its hind legs while selectively munching away. Sounds pretty standard, right?
Here we compare
nature
the limb structures
copy-pasted
of
this
the
exact same body type across totally unrelated
ground sloth,
species that
and
shared
panda.
similar daily routines. Think about the gigantic Megatherium ground sloth, the weird prehistoric Chalicother, and even massive dinosaurs like Therizinosaurus. Every single one of them rocked huge, sweeping claws perfectly built for stripping leaves right off the branches, exactly like our pandas and ancient sloths did. Seeing all these incredible evolutionary copycats really makes you wonder, if none of these prehistoric beasts had died out, would our natural world basically look exactly the same today? Honestly, who knows? Thanks for hanging out, and catch you next time on Extinct Zoo.